So, although this is normally a Parsha class, but we're going to talk about Chanukah today since it's also Chanukah. And it's good to get into the spirit of the day. So we're actually going to focus on the prayer that we say in the Amidah on Chanukah. Chanukah has one prayer that is specific to Chanukah. Of course, there are songs that we sing after we light the menorah. There is Haneres Alalu, where we talk about why we're lighting and what happened and so on. And there's Ma'os Sur, which actually goes through a whole history of all kinds of miracles that happened to us as a nation. And then there's the Al Hanisim, which is a prayer that we add to the Amidah and to the benching. We add it to the second to last blessing of the Amidah, which is the Thanksgiving blessing, where we say Moedem Anachnu Lach, we give thanks to Hashem for all the miracles that He does for us constantly, every day. And in that context, we give thanks to Hashem for the miracles of Chanukah. We also say this prayer in benching. We say it in the second blessing of benching, which is also about Thanksgiving. Noida Lacha is how the second blessing starts. We give thanks to you, Hashem. And that blessing is mostly about the land of Israel, thanking Hashem for the land. That's why we say Al Ha'aretz, Al Hamazon. That's how it ends, on the land and on the food. So in the context of that blessing, we also thank Hashem for the miracles of Chanukah. So, with no further ado, let us read the text of that prayer. You may find that the text is perhaps a little bit different than what you're used to. I chose a Nusach Sfar text, so if you dive in a different Nusach, you might find it a little bit different, but it's more or less the same. And we're going to especially focus on the second to the last line, but we'll read up to there as well and talk about other points if they come up. Okay, so we say, Va'al hanisim, va'al ha'purkan, va'al ha'gvuros, va'al ha'tshuos, va'al ha'neflois, va'al ha'nachamois, va'al ha'malchamois, sha'asisa leveseinu bayamim hahem bezman hazeh. We thank you for the miracles, for the redemption, for the mighty deeds, for the deliverances, for the wonders, for the consolations, and for the wars that you performed for our fathers in those days at this season. Hold on 1 second, that's my son calling. Just 1 moment, please. I'm giving the phone to mommy from Lubavitcher. Sorry, my son has a flight tomorrow, so he may have been calling about that flight. So, yeah. Okay, so okay, sorry about that. Okay, it wasn't my son after all. Okay, so of course, Hashem did the miracles for our forefathers in those days, in this season. When we talk about this season, we mean that it is in the same time of the year now when those miracles happened, the 25th day of Kislev, and so on. But of course, we also are alluding to the fact that Bayamim Ahem Bizman Hazeh, that Hashem did miracles in those days, but He continues to do miracles in our days as well. And of course, we see them sometimes more clearly, sometimes less clearly, sometimes in a personal way, sometimes in a global way. But there's no question that these miracles have not stopped and Hashem is still with us. Okay, here's the text of the unique prayer to Chanukah, because what we just said is also recited in Purim. And then we have two paragraphs. One is for Chanukah and one is for Purim. So we will learn the Chanukah one. Bimei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. In the days of Matisyahu, the son of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Who was the Kohen Gadol, by the way? This is not a rhetorical question. Was it Matisyahu or was it Yochanan? Feel free to unmute yourself or to type in the answer if you have it or if you would like to guess. Excuse me for drinking. I'm just trying to get over something.
Wasn't it Jason, someone that was placed by the Hellenists?
Well, he was the Kohen Gadol who was replacing the righteous Kohen Gadol, absolutely. But here we're talking about the righteous Kohen Gadol. Matisyahu was the son of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who was the righteous Kohen Gadol, who was replaced by Jason. And because they wanted somebody, who would be in their spirit and aligned with their culture and whatever else. So the Kohen Gadol was actually Yochanan Kohen Gadol. He was the Kohen Gadol, and Matisyahu had never served as the Kohen Gadol until after, of course, they won the battle. When they won the battle, then he became the Kohen Gadol once again. But originally, his father was the Kohen Gadol, and then when he was deposed, he went into hiding with his sons, in the area outside the Jerusalem, the Judean hills, and so on. When the wicked Greek Empire rose up against your nation Israel, of course, we know they were not from Greece per se, because they were the Seleucid dynasty that was ruling in Syria, but nevertheless, they were the Greek culture. This happened, of course, after Alexander the Great conquered pretty much the entire civilized world, or I should say the world that was known of at that time. And when he died, it was divided amongst his three generals, and there was a lot of rivalry between those generals, which also was part of one of the factors that led to this oppression that the Jewish people were experiencing. Lahashkicham Torasecha, they were trying to make them forget your Torah. What this is indicating is that they did not have a problem with the Jewish people having a Torah, meaning to say a tradition and a culture, and you have your bagels, you have your lox, you have your particular foods. They were not against each local country having its unique, traditions. But they didn't like the fact that we relate to Hashem as Torah Secha, your Torah, that we have an extreme devotion to Hashem. As we continue, Ula Avira Mechuke Ritzonecha, and to remove them from the statutes of your will. That means the main thing that bothered them were the statutes, the mitzvahs that were not logical, that are not logical. The mitzvahs that make sense, they can handle, because in Greece, everything had to be, logical and so on and so forth, scientific, at least to the best of the science of those days. But they could not handle that the Jewish people observed Torah in a way that was super rational, and their devotion to Hashem was super rational. So this is something that bothered them. They tried to obliterate that.
Rabbi, can you make this a little larger?
Yes. There we go. Okay. Did you guys get the handout, by the way? I emailed it to Rabbi Smith.
I never get any handouts, and I don't know why.
Okay, contact Rabbi Smith. Make sure you're on his list.
I should be.
Okay. I don't have everybody's email, so I just email it to the rabbi, and I assume that he takes care of it.
All right, thank you, Rabbi.
Sure. Va'ata barachamecha harabim, and you in your great mercy, amarta lahem be'es sarasam, you stood for them in the time of their trouble. Ravta es rivam, you fought their fight. Danta as dinam, you judged their judgment. Nakamta as nekmasam, and you venged their vengeance. Masarta gibarim biyad chalashim, you gave over a mighty army in the hands of a weak army. Of course, the Greek army was well known in those days. They had elephants, they had trained soldiers, they had the best armaments. And the Jewish people were just a ragtag bunch of, guerrilla people who just kind of gathered together and did their best. So it was a really unlikely scenario that they should win. But of course, if Hashem is on your side, then anything can happen. V'rabim biyad ma'atim, many in the hands of the few. Now, I'm not sure exactly of the numbers, but if you do read the Megillah of Antiochus and the book of the Chashmonaim, they talk about the amount of soldiers, the sheer size of those Greek armies, and how the amount of armor was like just glittering in the sun wherever you looked. And the fact that the Jewish people overcame them was completely unexpected, except in Hashem's eyes, of course. Utmeim biyad tahirim. And this is an interesting one. The impure were given over in the hands of the pure. Now, this is a little bit unusual, because when it comes to strong in the hands of the weak, yeah, that's a miracle. Many in the hands of the few, that's a miracle. But why is impure in the hands of the pure a miracle? I mean, on the contrary, that makes sense. The pure should win over the impure. And the same thing goes with the next statement, Urishoim biyad tzadikim, the wicked in the hands of the righteous. V'zeinim biyad oiske sarasecha, and once again, how does he translate it in the English? The insolent sinners into the hands of diligent students of your Torah. So those three don't seem to be miraculous. I mean, they're all true. The Greek army, there were impure people, they were wicked, they were insolent, and the Jews were pure, they were righteous, they were Torah students. But if we're trying to emphasize the miracle here, we don't really see how that's more miraculous. So here's a very interesting thought that the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains. When we talk about the laws of purity and impurity, we are specifically referring to Jewish people, because the laws of purity and impurity do not apply to a non-Jewish person. It's a specific Jewish law. Now, if a non-Jew passes away, then his body does give off impurity, and a Kohen cannot touch it or be in the room or whatever. That's true. But as long as the non-Jew is alive, we don't consider them ritually impure, because those are laws that are unique to the Jewish people who got the Torah. So if you're talking about pure in the hands of impure, we're talking about Jewish people. And this alludes to the fact that the Jewish people at that time, many of them were on the side of the Greeks, because many of the Jews had become Hellenized, like somebody mentioned earlier. Jason was the high priest, and there was another high priest later, Melanos or something, and all kinds of Greek-sounding names, but they were actually Jewish people who liked the Greek culture and who liked that style and so on. And a lot of them were battling against their fellow brethren. And this is something that we don't really speak about so much because it's kind of painful to think about the fact that this was not just Jews and Greeks, but it was actually Jews and Hellenized Jews. But in fact, throughout our history, we've had our biggest troubles from within. Even going back to the Roman destruction, which was a little bit later, it was the biggest problem we had was within our own ranks. There were 3 different groups within Jerusalem, all fighting and so on. And then when you talk about the Assyrian threat against Jerusalem, there were plenty of Jews who were trying to be on the Assyrian side and actually aid the Assyrians conquer Jerusalem, believe it or not. And that's always been, a soft spot that we've had, that unfortunately sometimes the Jews are against their fellow Jews and they can cause much more harm than our other nations who are our enemies. And we are seeing this today in the battle over the yeshiva education system in New York, where the government is really overstepping its bounds and trying to tell the yeshivas what they're allowed to teach and what they're not allowed to teach. They're not telling that to the Catholic schools. They're not telling that to the Protestant schools, only the yeshivas, which is clearly discrimination. But this is really coming from disgruntled yeshiva students who want to, let out their anger at the system that they were unhappy with and whatever. And they're really feeding the government whatever information they want, and that's really what's leading to this whole trouble. So Hashem should help, and we should win that battle too, just like we won the Chanukah battle. I should pause and take questions because I'm talking for a long time. Any questions? Isaac, any questions?
No.
Anna?
Enjoying listening to you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Where is the name Hanukkah came from? What is the origins of this, of the name of this holiday? And then the second one, is it pretty common that a very culturally developed nation is influencing people who are strong believers?
So in terms of Hanukkah, let's take one thing at a time. In terms of Hanukkah, so the word Hanukkah usually means a dedication. We have the Chanukah's HaMizbeach, which was the dedication of the Mizbeach, of the altar. That happened in the desert when they put up the Mishkan for the first time. They had 12 days of celebration, or actually, 7 days of celebration before, and then 12 days of special sacrifices afterwards. And some relate the name Chanukah to that same concept, because the Beis Hamikdash was defiled by the Greeks. It was turned really into a place of idol worship. They brought their idols into the sanctuary. The actual Mizbeach could not be used after they used it for their idols. They had to literally take it apart stone by stone, put it in storage, because it had holiness, so they couldn't just throw it out. But they had to rebuild the Mizbeach because you cannot use an altar that was used for idols for Hashem. So they really kind of redid the Beis Hamikdash, or some parts of it. And that's why Hanukkah is appropriate, because it was like a dedication of the Beis Hamikdash. So that's number one. Some say that it's actually made of 2 different words. Chanu means they rested, like a chanaya, which is like a place for parking in modern Hebrew. It's like a place to stop your car to rest it. So Chanu, they rested Chav Hei on the 25th. That means they fought the battle up until the 25th and the 24th. And the 25th was already a day of rest. That was the day after they fought. And that's when the celebration started, basically. In terms of larger, conquering nations trying to tamper with the local culture and religion, it seems that this was something that the Romans did, that the Greeks did, where they wanted to kind of homogenize the various nations that they had conquered to try to, bring people under similar religions and beliefs and cultures. And they hoped that that would keep the barbarians, under their thumb, so-called barbarians. Unfortunately, we've had that in later history too. The USSR and communist Russia trying to tamp out religion probably had to do with the same thing. They wanted everybody to be devoted to the state and to their communist beliefs, and they felt like religion would be a conflict to them.
That's it. They were afraid that people who are such a strong believers would become eventually rebellion leaders, someone who would sooner or later will try to overturn the tyranny, or?
Yes, probably, yes. That I'm sure that was part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that so often we as a Jewish people are so interested in cultural development that sometimes the main role is forgotten, because it's kind of our eyes are covered with all of this veil of not something very significant. I really feel that sometimes, because of this hunger of learning and knowing something new and really because trying to understand someone's culture, sometimes the strong belief is kind of maybe not doubted, of course, but maybe not put it up front.
Right. Well, learning per se is not a problem. It's when the learning becomes about the culture and about the food and about, things like that, and not about what's really important.
That's exactly what I.
The core of the religion and the belief system and the observances that are supposed to go with that. So there's nothing wrong with having a donut and having a latke and having some chocolate Chanukah gelt. But of course, those are supposed to be aids to the main point of Chanukah, which is about devoting ourselves to Hashem and overcoming our own struggles. We don't, thank God, we don't have to fight physically against these things right now, but we still have, spiritual battles both within and without. And we're supposed to have strength from Chanukah to be successful in those.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure. Mordechai, it's good to have you back. Or David, sorry, not Mordechai, I'm getting mixed up. David, you were gone for a class.
Yeah, I had some medical things going on.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're better. I hope you're better, but I'm glad you're back.
It's a work in progress, position.
Okay, hopefully we all are. Okay, so we continue. iPad entered the waiting room. There you go. Okay, so and you made yourself a great name, a great and sanctified name in your world. And for your nation Israel, you did a great, deliverance. And redemption unto this very day. We are still redeemed, thank God, and free to observe our religion. Here we are so many centuries later. And then your children came. Lidvir beisecha, to the holy of holies of your abode. Dvir actually means like a hallway, but they're translating that as referring to that narrow space, which was the Holy of Holies. And they cleared out your Heichal. He translates that as your temple. V'tiaru es mikdashecha, and purified your sanctuary. V'hidliku neres b'chatzos kachacha, and kindled lights in the courtyards of your sanctuary. Actually, that's not an exact translation. If we wanted to translate it precisely, it would be v'hidliku neres b'chatzos kachacha. They lit candles in your holy courtyards. I'm going to change that in my document at least, because that's important for the purpose of the rest of this class. V'kavu shmoinas yimei Chanukah elu, and they established these 8 days of Chanukah, lahoidos ulahalel l'shimcha hagodol, to thank and praise your great name. Okay, so I wanted to focus a little bit on these words. V'hidliku neres b'chatzos kachacha. They lit candles in your holy courtyard. Now, why would they light candles in the courtyard? The menorah of the Beis Hamikdash belonged in the sanctuary, in the covered building that was the actual building of the Beis Hamikdash. You went in through a hallway, and then you went into the Heichal itself, the actual sanctuary. On your right side, you had the shulchan, which was the table that had the 12 showbread on it that stayed there from week to week until the Kohanim would eat it on Shabbos. In the middle, you had the golden mizbeach, the golden altar, where they would sacrifice the ketoras, the incense, twice a day. And finally, on the left side, you had the menorah, which had 7 lamps, and they would light it every night. Some say they would light it again in the morning. And that is the menorah that, of course, the miracle of Chanukah happened with. And that's the menorah that they did not have enough oil for, except for one day. Everybody knows, and miraculously it lasted for 7 days. That menorah does not belong in the courtyard. That menorah belongs in the sanctuary. Just by the way, the menorah that they used at that time, it seems it was not a golden menorah. It seems that the Greeks either contaminated the golden one or perhaps looted it and they didn't have it. And they built another menorah out of tin, because even though it's supposed to be gold, but if the Jewish people can't afford it, you can make a menorah out of any metal. So apparently they made a tin menorah, and that's what they used until they got wealthier in the coming years and were able to make it out of gold. But in any case, why would they light the candles in your holy courtyards instead of in the sanctuary?
To make it public,
To make it public.
public, so people can see it.
That's an idea. But how did they know that it would be a miracle before it started?
They believed.
They were anticipating a miracle, so they already brought it out. I mean,
Yes.
I hear you. I do hear you. I just don't know if that's the right thing to do, to change the place of the menorah for the sake of publicizing the miracle. I hear the argument. So I will say an interpretation of the Chassam Sofer that kind of has to do with that. So the Chassam Sofer explains that what happened was the actual sanctuary was still full of idols, and they didn't want to wait until they could clean it out to light the menorah. So instead, they lit it in the courtyard, and then after they saw that it miraculously did not go out, then they said, wait, we're not putting it back in so fast, even though by then they could have already cleaned it. But once it was lighting in a miraculous way, they figured they would leave it out there so that everybody could see the miracle. So that is what the Chassam Sofer explains. So it's similar to what you were saying, Harold. And he adds that we know you are allowed to light in the courtyard if necessary. In fact, there's a halacha that hadlaka kshera bizarre, that the actual lighting of the menorah is kosher even with a non-kohen. The cleaning of the menorah has to be done by a kohen, but the actual lighting of the menorah does not have to be done by a kohen. It can be done by even a regular Jew. And the question is, how is that possible to ever happen practically if the menorah is in the sanctuary and a non-kohen is never allowed to enter that sanctuary? So how is it possible to say that it's kosher for a non-kohen to light the menorah? And this brings us back to the Chassam Sofer. That if
I'm thinking they bring it out.
I'm sorry?
I'm thinking they bring it out back into the courtyard.
So if they
The
needed,
Kohen can light it.
so if they needed to, like in this case, according to the Chassam Sofer, they would bring it out to the courtyard. And if that were the case, even a non-Kohen could light it. So this is how he explains this line. Now, the question is, there's a few questions on this interpretation. Because first of all, the text of the prayer does not seem to support this interpretation. Because if you look at the text, it says, then they came to your sanctuary and they cleaned it out and they emptied it, they purified it. So it seems like by that time, the Beis Hamikdash, the sanctuary, had already been purified. So why couldn't they just light it inside like the usual way? That's question number one. Question number two is the language here is v'hidliku neres b'chatz rois kadshacha, plural. They lit candles in your holy courtyards, plural. So that has to be understood even according to the Chassam Sofer. Now the Beis Hamikdash did have more than one courtyard. That's true. There was the Ezer Yisrael, which is where the Jewish people could go, regular Jewish people. There was the Ezra's Kohanim, where the Kohanim could go. There was the Ezra's Nashim, where the women would go. And then there was the Har HaBayis, which was the Temple Mount, which was even further out. And all of these places were unroofed. There was no roof over them. So they were kind of like a courtyard. So you did have multiple courtyards, but there's only one menorah. Obviously, they weren't parading the menorah out from one courtyard to another. Wherever they thought the right place to light it, that's where they would light it. So we have to understand why it says they lit the neres, the lamps, in your holy courtyards, plural. So here's the interpretation the Lubavitcher Rebbe gives. I know this is going to sound like a chiddush. In Hebrew, it's called a chiddush, when you hear something unexpected, but that's what it is. It's a chiddush. Here's the chiddush. The Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that these candles that they lit in the holy courtyards was not the menorah. They were simply celebratory candles. The Jewish people were so happy that they won the battle and they rededicated the Beis Hamikdash that they lit candles to celebrate their victory. Kind of like you have candles celebrating a chuppah. Some people put out a candle, candles at a bris. You put out candles at a festive meal. In shuls, there used to be candles. Nowadays, where we have electric lights, but there used to be a lot of candles in shul because it represents, simcha and joy. So the Jewish people were expressing their joy in their miraculous victory and in their ability to once again have their Beis Hamikdash, and that's why they lit candles. So the problem with this pshat is, yes, question. Yes.
Yeah, I think that the issue was they used the oil. They didn't use candles.
Yes,
as you
absolutely.
say.
Absolutely. I'm mistranslating. How do they translate it here? Lights. They kindled lights in your holy courtyards. Yes, that is correct. They were not candles of wax or beeswax. They were,
There wouldn't be a miracle with a candle. Maybe.
yes, that's correct. The word in Hebrew is ner, and ner actually means a lamp. So they lit lamps, really. And the lamps were with oil.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we know that they only had one cruse, one small jug of pure oil, and that they used for the menorah, the holy menorah, and that had to be pure. But when they were lighting the celebratory candles, sorry, not candles, the celebratory lamps to celebrate that miracle, they did not have to use pure oil because it wasn't a mitzvah per se. So they used whatever oil, and that's how they were celebrating. So the issue is that we have to address is that if this interpretation is correct, it's very unusual to have an entire paragraph about the miracle of Chanukah without a mention of the miracle of the oil. If this is correct, the whole focus here is about the miraculous victory in the war. And then, of course, the taking back the Beis HaMikdash, and then celebrating with candles, but not addressing at all the wondrous miracle of the fact that the menorah lasted for 8 days. So, of course,
Rabbi,
yes.
Hi.
Hi.
The Sephardic format is different.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's at the very end. So it says, "Kavu shmonat yemei Chanukah elu v'halelu b'hoda'ah ve'asita imahem nisim v'niflaot v'nodeh lishmecha hagadol sela."
All right, so it doesn't say anything about B'chatzor Katshacha.
Well, it does. Chatzot Kodshecha is there, but I'm reading from the point that appears to be somewhat different than yours.
I'm just looking at the Amida here in Sefaria, Edota Mizrach. Sefaria is a great website, by the way. They have so many texts, Hebrew, English. Ala Nisim b'mei Matisyahu. אחר כך באו והנחל לדביר בסך וזרוע ודין מוקשחה ודליקו נס בחצור קודשחה וקבעו 8 ימי חנוכה אלו בהלל ובהודאה ועשית עמהם ניסים נפלאות ונודע לשמך הגדול סלע. Yes, it does finish differently. Yes, every nusach has slight differences. So I just chose the nusach Sfard one, but this line is there as well. So we have to understand it either way.
Right, but they meant the point that I'm saying is that ve'asita imahem nisim v'niflaot. So here they do mention.
Right. Well, it does talk about nisim even in the beginning. Ala nisim, ala pukan, ala gurot, and so on, ala niflaot. So it does mention the idea of miracles. But if this is correct about b'chatzor kodshecha, referring to the celebratory candles, so we don't actually specify. We don't specify the miracle of the miraculous lights on Chanukah, even though we do mention miracles in general. So that's what's unusual.
Well, wouldn't the first set of nisim and niflaot that are described in the beginning talks about the actual battles that occurred? Whereas at the very end, we're actually talking about the miracles with the lights themselves.
I mean, it could be. It's just not explicit. It could be it's referring to that. So it could be referring to that, but it's still unusual that it does not address it clearly. If you contrast that with Haneres Halalu, that we say after we light the menorah, there it's all about that miracle.
Right, but
Yep.
I mean, I'm looking at it the way it is written and the flow of it. I mean, the beginning, it talks about what Yavan was trying to do and the fact that Hashem did all these miracles to, he basically did everything against what the Hellenists wanted to accomplish, and he did, you judge them and you gave them such a judgment, and then you took revenge upon them in such a way, and then you delivered the strong in the hands, etc. So when it, so it looks like it's flowing according to the time scale of what was going on. And the last part talks about going into the Beit HaMikdash, cleaning it out, etc., and lighting the lights, and then they makes the statement Va'asita imahem nisim v'niflaot.
Right. No, the sequence of events certainly looks like it's leading up to that point, but it still is interesting that it's not explicit. So
I think, Rabbi, you could say that it's dealing, the whole piyut, or if you may call it that, is dealing with what Hashem has done for us. All the things, the lighting we did for him. So that may be in another area, but now it's saying all the great wonders, and despite the fact that, as you said, most of the people were Hellenic, most of the Jews were already Hellenized.
Mm-hmm. I hear you're suggesting that the miracle of the lights, even though it was a miracle that Hashem did for us, because obviously we couldn't make it light that long, but it was in response to what we were doing, which is the lighting of it. So that's a mitzvah. So here we're focusing more on what Hashem did and less on what we did, although we were part of the battle too, obviously.
Sure.
Talking about more, the non-mitzvah activities that we did. So I hear that. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe suggests a answer by first asking another question, as is a very Jewish way. And that is, if you look in the Talmud, in Tractate Shabbos, the second chapter, where it talks about what Chanukah is, the Gemara says, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah? And it says, when the Jewish people were oppressed by the Greeks, and with Hashem's help, they overcame them. They entered into the sanctuary. They only found one like jug of oil, and it lasted for 8 days. So in the Talmud, it barely talks about the miracle of the battle at all. The whole focus is on the miracle of the oil, and it kind of just mentions the battle in passing leading up to that. So it's the opposite of what we have here in this prayer, where it's focusing very much on the battle and not on the oil, at least according to this interpretation. It's also interesting, by the way, the Rebbe does not address this in the talk because it's not technically part of the Torah, but in the book of the Maccabees, which was never canonized, so we don't consider it like a Torah book, but it's a historical book that whoever wrote in those days, if you look at that book, it does not mention the miracle of the menorah. The whole book talks about the battles and this battle and that battle, and it talks about the miracles, but the miracles of the battle. and also talks about the Beis HaMikdash and entering the Beis HaMikdash and celebrating and so on. So once again, it's like there's almost like two stories that are being told in different places, and they're like both true, but they're not integrated. They're like two different stories. So here's the concept. The concept is that,
Rabbi,
yes, please.
I wasn't sure if you could see my hand.
No, I can't see everybody at once, but yes.
It's an oddity that it doesn't mention Hashem's name any place.
I mean, this prayer is talking to Hashem in second person. You know, we have to realize this is part of the Amida. So we said in the beginning of this bracha, Moidim Anachnu Lach, we give thanks to you, Hashem. Erev Avleika Ritzarayim, evening, morning, and afternoon. And then in that context, we say, Ala Nisim, Ala Porkan, Asisa, that you, second person, did to our forefathers and those days at this time. And then we continue to refer to Hashem in the second person. Ulacha Asisa Shem Gadol, you made a great name and holy name for your world. Ula'amcha Yisrael, and to your nation Israel. And again at the end, we're giving praise to your great name. So it doesn't say Hashem's name, but it talks about Hashem a lot. It's different than the Megillah of Esther, where Hashem's name is actually not spoken about at all. Not either, not by saying Hashem's name and not even referring to him. You know what I'm saying? Here it refers to Hashem, even though it doesn't use his name. There it doesn't even refer to him. So that's a whole nother story.
There's Psalms in Tehillim where it seems like David HaMelech is speaking directly to Hashem, and he says Elohim.
Absolutely, many times.
So I thought it was an odd thing that it doesn't mention Hashem, his name, in the entire, this is part of Shemona Esrei, and every single bracha mentions Hashem's name, Brachat Hashem, at the beginning and at the end. So
that is true, but this is part of a bracha. This is not a separate bracha. If it would be a separate bracha, it would absolutely have to have Hashem's name. The Gemara says any bracha that does not have Shem and Malchus, it has to have Hashem's name, and it has to say Melech HaOlam, King of the world. Without that, it's not called a bracha. So there's no question that without Hashem's name, this would not be a bracha. But this is part of a bracha. Whether it's in Shemona Esrei, it's part of Moedim. Whether it's in benching, it's part of, Noid Delacha, the second bracha of benching. So, yeah, I don't have an answer for why they didn't put Hashem's actual name in there. I don't know who the author was and what made them word it that way. But yeah, I don't know.
That's it. But your explanation is acceptable, and it's part of a bracha already.
It is part of a bracha, yes. Yeah. Okay, so here is the Vart. The Vart is, the idea is that we do separate these two Thanksgiving concepts because we want to point out that they're very different. The main celebration of Chanukah, as the Gemara says, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah about? The main thing is the miracle of the oil. Because we have to remember, the Greeks did not want to wipe us out physically, right? Because as we said, there were many Hellenized Jews on their side. They didn't have a problem with that. They wanted to wipe us out spiritually. They wanted to get rid of our connection to Hashem, to the Torah, to the special, unique mitzvahs that the Jewish people have. And the physical victory there's no point to the physical victory per se for Jewish people to exist in body, because we would have existed in body anyway as Hellenized Jews. But that's not what is special about Hanukkah, because Hashem doesn't need just another nation of Hellenized people. He has 70 other nations. The point is the Jewish people are supposed to have a relationship with Hashem, are supposed to serve him in an extraordinary way, and that's what was at stake at that time. And therefore, we focus, at least the Gemara focuses, on the miracle of the light. Because the main message of Chanukah is not a physical victory. The main message of Chanukah is a spiritual victory, is the fact that it's light over darkness, the fact that we can experience Hashem's supernatural miracles in the context of serving him, in the context of trying to maintain our religion and our faith and our devotion to Hashem. And that's why the Gemara does not want to turn it into just a national holiday for winning a war. Every nation has its holidays for winning wars. There's VE Day and there's V Day and there's, I don't know, all the days that we have and other countries have. That's great. But that's not what Chanukah is, because it's a special day for us to celebrate our connection to Hashem, not about our physical victories, about our connection to Hashem, which is expressed through the fact that we devoted ourselves to Hashem to do this mitzvah, despite the difficulties, and Hashem enabled us miraculously to do the mitzvah. So we focus, therefore, on that miracle in the Gemara to the exclusion of the miracle of the battle, or not totally excluding it, but not focusing on it. On the other hand, in the V'ala Nisim prayer that we say in davening and in benching, we do want to thank Hashem for that miracle of the battle, because it did happen, and it was a miracle, and we can't just let miracles pass by unnoticed. When Hashem gives us a gift, whether it's a gift of health, a gift of children, a gift of wealth, a gift of shidduch, a gift of another day in this world, we always have to thank Hashem. We wake up in the morning, we say, Moida ani lefanecha, thank you Hashem for being able to breathe and see and walk and talk. All these things are miracles. So we have to thank Hashem for them. We cannot take any of them for granted. But within this thank you, the sages did not put in the miracle of the oil, because we don't want to make that miracle like a sidebar in this whole story. It's not a sidebar. It's a huge thing. That's really what it is about. So we're going to give a time to thank Hashem for that. We're going to light the candles. We're going to say an Eir Salalu, and we're going to recognize that miracle, and we're going to learn the lessons from that miracle, and so on. And in the davening, we are also going to take time to thank Hashem for the miraculous battles that we won, but we're not going to mention the menorah explicitly, because we don't want to make that like an asterisk, like a little detail in that story. So that's the Chiddush. Any questions? I've been talking a lot this class.
Well, a 1-minute summary and takeaway.
A 1-minute summary with first questions, then I can include the answers in the 1-minute summary, maybe.
That's you're considering the victory and, to bringing back the temple as a tool that actually is then kind of brings us to a real thing, to what is the whole purpose of Chanukah and lighting the candles. Exactly. Did I understand you right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is a preface to the more important miracle of the lights, which represents devotion to Hashem, adding in a mitzvah. A mitzvah is called a lamp. Ner mitzvah, the Torah says. A mitzvah is like a lamp. We have to add in that all the time. So actually another point, which you reminded me of, is that the light, which obviously the menorah shed and mitzvahs are compared to, light is the most spiritual of all physical things. In this world, we have flesh, we have stuff that, everything is made out of. And then we have some things that are less less physical. So we have, let's say, sounds. You can't touch them, you can hear them, but they're more limited. They only travel a certain amount. We have smell, which is also, you can't touch it, but still it's just like little particles. They move around a little bit here and there. But light is something that you really, you can't like put it in a box, you can't hold it, you can't touch it. It's physical, it is a physical phenomena, but it's the most spiritual kind of physical thing we have. And it's interesting that when we talk about spiritual things, we often use the word light. I see the light, or the light of God, or the light of a mitzvah. And so, and obviously these are borrowed terms, but they refer to the most spiritual thing that we can possibly imagine. And that's also the symbolism of this particular mitzvah, of this particular miracle taking place with lights. Hashem could have done any number of miracles. Hashem had a choice of miracles in his miracle smorgasbord, but he chose to do a miracle specifically with the menorah and with light because he wanted to give us a more spiritual type of experience and miracle.
And you believe that that's why Lubavitcher Rebbe is trying to separate celebrational lamps, candles, whatever, from the menorah candle, because it's really two different purposes.
Exactly.
And maybe that's why when we started to learn about the beginning of creation, the first phrase that light was separated from darkness, because that's a symbolic of all the life that actually in existence.
That's true. That's true. That's a whole nother shiur, but that's true. That's the original light of the first day is a spiritual light, and that is related actually to the Chanukah miracle. A lot of the commentaries talk about that. So maybe for next year.
Rabbi,
yes,
you said about the impure into the hands of the pure.
Yes.
And how a non-Jew there's not a concept of pure and impure. Yes. I didn't understand again what you said was the explanation.
Well, the explanation is that the impure is not referring to the non-Jews. It's referring to the Jews, the Jewish Hellenists, who were literally fighting in the battles against their fellow Jews. So you might think, well, maybe they would have Hashem on their side because they are Jewish. And that's why it's a chiddush. That's why we thank Hashem. No, even though we were fighting against our fellow Jews, Hashem still helped us to be victorious. Okay, so 1 minute summary. We celebrate the miracles of Chanukah. The primary focus in the celebration is not about the physical victory, but about the spiritual victory, about the light over darkness. And we have to take that lesson. Every person in their own life has struggles of light and darkness, whether it's struggles from within or struggles from without. And we have to take that lesson and be victorious and know that Hashem is on our side to help us be victorious, even if the powers of darkness seem stronger. We know that Hashem can help us overcome them and bring about the light of the mitzvahs, the light of the Torah, the light of Chanukah into our lives and so on. We also do thank Hashem for the physical victory, but like we mentioned, that is separated into a separate prayer so that we don't make the spiritual miracle, like secondary. So that's the shiur.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Regards from London.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rebbe.
I'm sorry I missed last week. I was busy traveling and I had a very nice bar mitzvah with my nephew.
Freilich Chanukah.
Yeah.
Happy Hanukkah, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Herschel, even though I'm not seeing you, Herschel, but nice to see your name at least. Glad you're joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.